Welcome back, folks. Episode 13 of the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, we have Kim Scanlan. Kim Scanlan is a former staff sergeant and detective sergeant with the Metro Toronto Police Services. That's right, full career. And we talked about what it was like to be a police officer over the last 30 years or so. And she had some pretty sensitive areas she worked in. So this was an interesting conversation. If you're into policing or finding out what some of the murkier jobs that cops have to do, this is the episode for you. Thanks for coming on the show, Kim. She's also a qualified mediator, and she has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology. So she's smart and cool and a great cop. Review us on iTunes. Come on, man. Get over to that site. Put some reviews out there. And guess what? The review we like the best. We choose it. Whatever one we like the best, we're going to send you a $50 gift card on Amazon. That's right, son. So you or whoever, you're going to get $50 just by writing a review on Amazon if we think it's awesome. And it's totally up to us. It's not a contest. We're just going to decide which one it is. So go to iTunes and write a review. But for right now, check out Kim Scanlan on episode 13 of the Get a Grip on Life podcast. Welcome, Kimberly Scanlan.
Glad to be here.
So you started off in the policing service, I don't want to say how long, the late 80s or so?
Yes, that'd be right. 1987.
1987. Now, were there a lot of other women police officers at that time?
No, there really weren't. Certainly there were pioneers who were there 10 and longer years than me.
Sure.
But when I arrived at my permanent posting, there were only 3 in our station.
Out of how many?
There would have been 60 plus officers.
So 60 officers and 3 women.
Yes.
What was that like? Was it easier then or was it harder?
To put this in context for me, I have 6 brothers and a sister. So being around a lot of males isn't too troubling.
Okay.
But certainly my first full-time police station was in the Northeast in Scarborough.
Okay.
And I actually changed in the jail cells. We used to just put cardboard over the window that they'd peer through the door to check on the prisoners. So I'd just cover that with cardboard, and that's where I would change.
So if the prisoners saw there was a woman looking in, they'd react differently?
Only when the cells were empty. That's when I got changed.
Okay. So why did you choose it? I see that you studied sociology. You had a degree. Why did you choose policing?
Well, actually, I went through university, and I actually played field hockey for York University, and we traveled quite a bit. So I didn't carry a full course load through the first, second, third years. And I decided, I really wanted to become a lawyer. Mm-hmm. But after going to school for 5 years, and I still hadn't completed my degree, I said, well, you know what? Why don't I take a break, and I'll just try and learn about law differently. And I was very athletic at the time, and so I said, I'll try being a police officer. So threw my hat in the ring and was hired right off the bat.
And were you hired by the police and then trained, or did you go for like a police college first or something like that?
In 1987, when I was hired, at that time there were big classes going through. So I did go to police college, but it was unique in that we were only hired and we trained in Toronto. So that allowed all the other police services surrounding us to send their officers to the Ontario Police College because everyone was increasing their police services in size.
So in terms of boots on the ground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell me, so there's different, there's arguments for a larger share of the police force to be female. I've read different articles that suggest that a lot of the disputes that police handle are domestic, and a lot of times, it's better to have a male and female officer attend, or 2 females rather than 2 males at the scene of a domestic dispute. I read a couple articles about that. Is that true in your experience? Does it make a difference?
Well, I would think if you take, the makeup of society, you'd want it to really reflect, the makeup of Toronto, let's say. So having 50% women, I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I know we're still in Toronto, it's probably less than 25%. They've been working at it for years, but they're just not getting there. But, it's not all about the brawn. Certainly there are some instances where, you want to be well-trained and you want to be strong and you could get into a fight. But most of my job, I found throughout my whole career, has been my ability to talk with people.
Yeah, there was the article discussed conflict de-escalation, and that, not that every men and women differ on individually, but overall women seem to be better at conflict de-escalation than men. As a percentage, and I know people get scared when they get into these realms, but generally there tends to be a de-escalation effect in domestic. I can't remember where I was reading this article, that women bring that to the table naturally. Is that true? Do you think in your experience in the police force?
I don't know if I'd say that necessarily, except for that, you go where your strengths lie. And I think women typically, because we tend to be a little shorter in stature and maybe not as broad and maybe not as strong as your typical police officer, although that is itself changing these days.
Sure.
Is that, our strengths would be our voice and our ability to talk to people and calm people down. So, I mean, for me, like I said, it's worked my whole career everywhere I've worked, and I've worked in a lot of different areas. I found that I could always usually get my way out of a situation, even one that was fairly volatile, by joking with someone or by just trying to reach them at their level.
Right. And so in policing, you have a situation and you introduce those, I guess, ability to introduce humor into a situation that's maybe intense as a way of diffusing it a little bit.
Right. For an example, once, and it was actually on this very street just south of here, when I first got on, I had a male who was just particularly angry. Something had happened in a store, and he was very upset. And he just wanted to take on the world. And both my partner and myself showed up. And he was ready for a fight. And so,
even with the police?
Oh, yeah. No,
Okay.
we were just prime targets there. So instead, I said, you know what? I go, what are you going to do? I said, you're going to beat up a woman. You're going to go home and tell your girlfriend or your mom what a great job you did beating me up. I said, is that really what you want to do? And, it kind of deflated him. And he goes, yeah, and he got into the back of the police car and we didn't have to fight. So
he was hot.
thankful.
He was ready to take on police officers, armed police officers.
Oh, yeah. He was just seeing blue. So I don't think he was necessarily seeing male, female. He just wanted to fight. And so when I was the one to kind of talk to him first, I managed just to get him to calm down. And then all the way to the station, we had a great discussion about, was it really worth it? Let's try and work through this. I know, the store manager upset you, but, you want a criminal record over all this. And, it turned out to work out very well. And a lot of times I find I would work at a police station. So let's say in my last role, I was the staff sergeant at 23 Division, always having prisoners come in. So the officers would come and parade them before me. And most people are either super upset or they're inebriated or something's going on. Usually they're pretty upset. And, I'm just able to, I guess, talk with them. And the more we treat them respectfully and humanely, I just find the better they responded to us. I mean, I don't need to be there all night for 8 hours having people screaming and yelling and causing damage or causing us problems. So, by treating them well and giving them something to eat, mostly, when we had to get them fingerprinted, it wasn't a big deal. They would just go with my fingerprint technician and they would allow themselves to be fingerprinted. They would allow us to search them when we needed to. They would get on the wagons to go down to Old City Hall when they needed to. And that's just really about how you treat people.
And this was all with Toronto Police Force, I take it. You're talking about the Toronto area.
Yes.
Your career was with the same service the whole way.
Yes.
How long were you there for?
31 years.
31 years. Okay. Do you miss being a police officer?
There are some days. I mean, I really just finished in March. So I
Okay.
officially retired March 1st. Especially with some of the things that are going on right now. Some days you wish you were there with the officers, some of the stuff that's been happening. I feel for them. I feel for the community. Lots going on there. But it's good also to be on my side now of the retired group that gets to sit back and pick and choose how we help and when we help and whatever we're going to do with our next 30, 40 years.
Can I ask you about, there's been a controversial issue, and I don't know if you have an opinion on it, but I remember listening to Mark Saunders talk about it a little bit, the carding issue. And what it was, that's a preventative policing policy, if I'm correct, right? So they're checking people's IDs before crimes, and a lot of the issue behind carding has been looked at as a racial issue in Toronto. And, Mark Saunders is a part of the community that is expressing that they're being targeted by this. And there was a ton of controversy over whether this was the right type of policing or not. And I read Giuliani's book, and he had said that carding was a very effective part of their policy in New York. How do you feel about it?
I think carding is a great tool, and unfortunately, it was misused back in the day. And what I'll say about that is there was a lot of pressure on officers to come up with numbers. And, as much as, and now I can say it, is police services don't like to say that there were never any numbers, but I recall
a quota system, so to
like
speak?
quotas, it could prevent officers from getting ahead on the service. I know as a staff sergeant, I repeatedly got letters once from a unit commander telling me, we were like in the red zone, which means my shift wasn't getting enough of the cards in. And so I think the quality of them suffered. And I think then, when you've got officers who feel under the pressure of these cards, they weren't putting in the best work. And it's unfortunate because then it got ruined and we had it taken away from us. But really, I do believe in it because you need intelligence to help solve these crimes. You need to know who might have been with whom, what were they driving, where were they going, what were the circumstances of certain people being in an area to help us further our investigations. I'd love to see it come back in a different way. I mean, what I see is in place right now is not really working at all.
What's in place right now to replace carding? Or is there anything in place to replace it?
It's really challenging. It's quite a lengthy process. And, you can tell the person, you don't have to talk to me, you can walk away, but that is the situation. And then you have to read for them, all the circumstances under which it's going to be used. And most people at that point will say,
see you later.
Yeah, I'm not interested, but thanks.
Okay, so describe to me what a carding incident, a carding situation would be like. I'm walking down the street at 2 a.m. or whatever, and how did the old system work? What would happen if the police looked at me and they said, I want to talk to this person? How would that go about? Okay,
so precisely that, 2 a.m, we would probably stop and just start talking with you. It depends on the area. Is it a high volume call area? Do we have break and enters late at night? Are people being assaulted in the area? So we would just stop and talk with you and take down your particulars, who you are. We'd ask you, why are you here at this hour? And you could say, hey, I just left a party. Fair enough. Or I'm just, coming from work, which is great. But then sometimes you get people say, well, I'm just here, man, and you say, okay, well, that's not good enough. Or the information they're providing us is, you can just say, it's bogus. It's not true. So you really want to know, okay, why are they here? And then you may find out the next day when a shopkeeper opens his shop, it's been broken into. And this guy could have been a perfect candidate for that. So it's just gathering information that's, time, place, some descriptors, who they are, where they were going, what they're wearing, who they're with. And so if something happens, let's say there's a shooting down the road, you would start there with your investigation.
Is that information stored in a database that can be accessible by computer, or how did it evolve over the years?
It had been, yes.
Okay.
And it was searchable by certain terms. You could search by tattoos, you could search by, hair color, different parameters.
Sure.
But now it's impossible almost to reach that database. You really have to have a solid reason to get into it. No, you don't need a warrant, but it's a very high level of approval to get that information.
So someone that's been carded 4 or 5 times in the same neighborhood where there's a lot of crimes going on, they're going to be coming up in these searches a lot, whether they're a criminal or not, though.
That could very well be true, but you would hope, again, if you have officers that are familiar with their community and their neighborhood, you eventually get to know who belongs there and who doesn't. And you're really not going to keep repeating carding people who you know.
Right.
And so, if you're into these neighborhoods, it's unfortunate. I just don't see that people, unless, let's say, there's someone who are known to us, let's say from a police side, that you would keep stopping, your average person and want to talk to them.
How did it get to become a racial issue, in your opinion? I know we're both white people here, but I mean, how did it get to that point where one community was saying this is targeted at us, as opposed to just a policing strategy that's used for everybody?
It would be my experience that most often you'll find the police in areas that are busy. Right now, for instance, Toronto police are very reactive. So if you see us in certain neighborhoods, it's because we're called there.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there just patrolling like we used to be unless it's a certain reason. Like, let's say right now there's a lot of violence in certain areas of Toronto.
Sure.
So there's extra officers working. And I can tell you, they're in those areas that typically there's a lot of gang activity or there's been a lot of violence. That's where they'll be. So that's the same thing with the carding, is typically we would be in those areas. And unfortunately, you have a lot of new immigrants that are living in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say necessarily all black,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely there would be a lot of persons of
people
colors.
of color. People
right.
of color, yeah. And so they're, feeling as if the police are targeting them, but it's more a reality of the neighborhood they live in and the level of crime in that neighborhood.
Absolutely. And so, when you look to how do we solve this problem, I think there definitely has to be a component of, maybe not putting all the brand new immigrants who are struggling. And some great, great families are living in these areas, but they're terrorized by some of the gang members that are living in there. And so it's really hard to work with them and talk with them and get them help that they want because they're being threatened. So, it's a bigger problem that we have, not only in Toronto, you see it worldwide, but when you have poverty playing a part, then there's some different things going on, and it's not all just a police problem.
Yeah, I think I think that the police, they're kind of in some ways, when I look at it, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in that the communities need more policing. But the media, I don't know it would be interesting to find out what the people in the communities think. Because when you hear about it on the news, you're always hearing about media people, different groups saying that this is a problem in this community. It'd be interesting to see, I'm sure, so I grew up right down the street here, Victoria Park and Finch. Okay. Across the street from my house is Chester Lee. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of crime going on in Chester Lee. And I remember my one of my best friends was a Nicaraguan, was the child of Nicaraguan immigrants who lived in Chester Lee. And they would have supported that program for sure. I mean, they were terrorized in that community for sure. They were definitely different than most of the people that lived in that community. There was always fights going on, and there was drug dealers everywhere. And his mom would complain to my mom how difficult it was to raise kids in that community. So it'd be interesting to see what the people in the actual people who live in those communities think, rather than what you hear in the news. Sometimes is not necessarily their view of, you understand what I mean? It's maybe those communities want more policing.
I would agree. I mean, I've seen, Chicago, and again, maybe it's just some media articles, when the police have now kind of withdrawn their services because they were involved in some pretty high-profile shootings.
Sure.
Some of the neighborhoods are begging them to come back because, things have just run rampant.
Yeah, degenerated far worse. Chicago is a very dangerous city right now. Are there different philosophies of policing? Like, so people run businesses differently. People run institutions with a different sort of philosophy. Does the Toronto police or Canadian police forces have a different approach to policing than some of the American police forces?
I think we have really quality training. Okay. I mean, we've spent, especially in the last 10 years or so, a lot more dealing with people with mental health issues, a lot more time spent on communication and like tactical communication, and not necessarily always go to any of our, let's say, armory that we have that's going to prevent something from happening. We don't always necessarily go to a baton or to a taser or to a firearm, but instead, we really try and talk to people first and establish the relationships, try and get a conversation going, and then see where it goes from there.
Is that a philosophy of policing, or is that just different? Is it just different in Canada because there's less guns on the street, or what is it? Where does that come from?
Well, if you go back to Sir Robert Peel, back in the day, he always said, he says, the police are the community and the community are the police. Okay. Which is true when you really think about it. Like, I know so many amazing, amazing police officers, and they come from the community. We're not bringing them in from, Longshore or something like that. Sure. So they would be very reflective of everything going around them. We don't just hire bullies or anything like that. I mean, they're well educated. They really are trying to hire a cross section of people. So I think that, maybe people have to be a little bit more understanding that, yes, we have some officers that are bad apples and they need to be dealt with. And there's nothing more embarrassing to me or upsetting than have a police officer who's done wrong.
Sure.
I don't want them on the job. I don't want to work with them. I don't want them to work anywhere near me or be anywhere near me. But that's a low percentage.
Yes.
And so same within the community. I don't go around believing that everyone in any particular community are all bad. Probably there's 10% that are really causing, again, they're getting most of the attention. They're getting the media attention. They're getting the police attention. But the rest of the people living there are some amazing people and some great families.
Struggling too with low income and that, but the kids are going to school. They're trying to get out of that life. I think most of the people in those communities. I know from Chester Lee that a lot of the friends that I had, they don't live there anymore. And they couldn't wait to get out of that community and to they live all over the place now. But I'm still in touch with some of them, and they've really improved their lives. So I think that it's an interesting conundrum we have. What is a staff sergeant? How many people directly report to you?
So at 23 Division, and it's fairly similar at most stations because they're relatively the same size. So I would be in charge of a whole platoon. So I would have 3 sergeants or 4. And underneath that, generally, it would be anywhere from 20 to 30 other members. So mostly constables, but we also have civilian support staff as well.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the number's gone way down. I'm going to say that.
You need more police officers you need?
Yes. I just think for frontline policing, and I'm just going back to my own belief, the basic philosophy is when somebody calls for help, you expect us to come. And you expect us to come right away.
Right away, yeah.
And the police used to boast, we have a 5-minute response time. Then we had an 8-minute response time. You'd be hard-pressed to get anyone to give you a response time now that's reasonable.
You mean in terms of a call coming in, how fast an officer attend to the scene?
That's right. And that caused me, in the last year and a half, some great concern.
I think there's a lot of so policing is a government job, right?
Yes.
So you're an employee of the city of Toronto or the region of Peel or Durham region or whatever it is, the province of Ontario. I think policing is a very difficult job when it comes to hours worked. In terms of, I think that not to pick on firefighters, but to contrast. My brother-in-law was a EMS. Okay.
Right.
And he said that EMS and the police are going full steam most of the time. And, he said the firefighters are usually not going full steam.
I have a couple brothers and now a daughter who are all firefighters.
God bless them. I'm not criticizing them.
No. I wouldn't run into a burning building, so it's not a job that I could do or want to do. But the fact that they have to sleep a certain minimum amount of hours is part of their job when they work the 24-hour shift, well, that's not the same for the police.
But I find police are under a lot more daily pressure than a lot of other and certain kinds of stress. Like, you attend at a murder scene, for example. Most people have not attended have never seen anything like that and never will see anything like that in their lives. Or if you're, you see a domestic violence dispute where there's someone's beaten up, or you're chasing, or you're in a situation where your cortisol levels are raised for a long time. I think that's a difficult job that most people don't understand. It's not just even giving out tickets. You got to deal with crap from people. People are upset. I find that police officers are constantly engaged, or not, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like officers are constantly engaging with people that are upset, stressed out, they're drunk, they're inebriated. This is very stressful to deal with on a daily basis. Do the police, do they have ways of dealing with this inside the force, or how do they deal with this level of stress that they're under? I find a lot of police officers get divorced. Yeah. They have a very high divorce rate.
Everything you're saying is very accurate. Mm-hmm. I know we've certainly been grappling with that a lot more in the last number of years, especially because we have had some members that have committed suicide, which is super tragic. You don't want to ever hear about that. But we have an employee assistance program. We have direct access to counseling services who've even now expanded to you can chat with them. So if you're sitting at home in your driveway and you just need to speak to someone, you can actually text them and someone will chat back with you. You can speak to them on the phone or you can go there. We also have trained officers that are like peer counselors, and also a whole program built. Toronto has 2 psychologists that are full-time employees, and I think they're looking for a third, just to deal with the numbers of officers who are needing their support.
I'm going to give you an anecdotal sort of thing I've noticed about police officers, and you tell me whether or not it's true. Okay. So all the police, I know quite a few police officers, went to high school with a bunch, and what I notice is that they tend to, over the course of their career, hang out more and more with other police officers. And then they tend to marry other police officers. And it happens a lot. Like you see a lot of police officers that are married to one another. You see a lot of police officers who tend to socialize more and more with other police officers. And is that as common as my anecdotal experience dictates?
Yes and no.
Okay, yes and no.
No, there is a lot of that. And I think it's just because you have common experiences and a shared understanding. So, I mean, officers hanging around with other officers, that makes sense. You know, you're going to be able to...
You're friends with who you work with a lot of times.
Yeah, you're going to be able to say things and share things with them that other people hearing that may really think you have a problem. As far as the marriages go, it's interesting because a lot of female officers I know have married. Their partners are typically in the police. Not everyone, but the males I tend to find, at least back in my day, marrying nurses and other shift workers or teachers. When they had the whole summer off, they seem to go
a lot of
route.
Teachers and police officers together too, actually.
Yes.
I agree. I've seen a lot of that too. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and I kind of was waiting to ask this. I think maybe it's a good time now, but how do you feel about, there's a couple other articles I read in sort of researching for this, there's a trend toward worldwide, maybe not in Toronto, but I've seen a couple things with Durham. How do you feel about the militarization of the police? Have you seen much of that? Like the darker uniforms, so light blue getting very close to black, wearing more like a military uniform. Have you seen, and then wanting to have, so I lived in Belfast for a year.
Okay.
And in Belfast, the police, at that time, it was the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which was made up of 99% Protestants and 1% Catholics. There was a problem there with the policing of the communities. The Catholic community was being policed by a separate community. And there was a strong militarization. They drove around in basically armored vans and stuff like that, and had very high-grade weapons and stuff. You see this in the States, and I know Durham Region, if memory serving me correctly, wanted to get more of those militarized vehicles for their policing. Isn't that, so I don't know if policing wants to project that kind of image to the public. Because once you go military, you're kind of like a different thing. Do you understand what I'm saying here, Kim?
Yes, it seems like it's gone, like for me, full circle.
Okay.
Because when I was first hired in 1987, it was a lot more, I'll say our activities were a lot more militant-based. We marched a lot, and our uniforms all had to match, and there was a lot more emphasis on that and how we acted, I would say. It just seemed more like that. Whereas now, again, here's a different perspective. Vehicles aside, because I really think a lot of it has to do with safety. So for us going to the dark blue shirts, sometimes, I mean, officers say, because you don't stick out at night. Like we went to the dark blue shirts, and then we had new vests. And there was a lot of concerns because the vests were sticking out too much. So they started matching our clothing, and they were dark blue vests. So I see that where, there's still that social aspect. For instance, when I was supporting for a whole month cancer, my epaulets were pink, or anti-bullying, or the LGBT community, then I had rainbow epaulets and numbers. And so I see this side of the police really trying to be more, I guess, palatable to the community, trying to show that, we're humans too, and it's not so military, but there's got to be an aspect or side to it where it's safety. So I know people get really concerned when they see someone walk in and their whole belt is nothing but tools.
Tools, and they're wearing a bulletproof vest, and it's very dark blue, like it's
Right.
almost black.
Right.
So military being black, policing being blue, right? That would be the colors, right? So there's a psychology to these colors, right? So when you darken your uniform and you put on more and more military gear, you're giving the impression of a soldier rather than a police officer.
Well, I disagree.
You disagree? Okay.
Well, okay. So I have a daughter.
Everything's in the name of safety.
Yeah, I have a daughter who's just retired from the military, and her vest was green. And when she was in Afghanistan, her vest was tan.
Right. Yes. No. Her fatigues. Yes. Agreed.
Okay.
But the why not wear black then?
Well, again, I think it's in the name of safety. When
Sure.
when I was first hired, everything was light blue.
That's the policing color.
Yeah.
That's because people look at light blue psychologically and they feel less threatened.
Okay.
So those are real. These are real. The reason why they were
I
light
guess they're
blues.
real concerns for people. But for us, to me, it's surrounded by safety.
Okay.
And it was out at night when it's dark, wearing a dark color. Just, if someone's going to take a shot at you from a balcony, they're not as likely to be able to really define who you are in a dark space as much as if you were wearing a light blue shirt. So I see it as safety reasons, but
I mean, I'll tell you that even in the lighting business, people can justify a lot of stuff through safety. I mean, safety is one of those things that it's the term. Like, for example, if you wanted to cut costs at a nuclear power plant, okay, so you say, let's say they put us in charge of Darlington 1 or whatever. We say, okay, we want to reduce expenses. Can't do that because of safety. Can't do this because of safety. So safety is one of those things that's put forward and oftentimes is disguising other motivations. I'm not saying that that's what's happening with darkening of the uniforms with police, but it's certainly... There's certainly an element. The reason why police officers' uniforms were light blue was to reduce the intimidation factor of the police.
well, it's interesting right now when I look at our police cars. I mean, Toronto has gone from yellow to white to gray to now white and gray. I don't know where we're going from here. But
then they have black with only when you shine light on it can you see it's a police car. I think that's also
That's the dark
intimidating.
gray.
Yeah, I think that's intimidating as well.
Well, interestingly enough, if you ask the chief, from
Okay.
what I understand, is they were ordered that way because they were the cheapest, because that was like the standard color coming off the line, and that they have to get them painted. So
If
that's
I
what
was
the
on a
chief said.
civilian oversight committee, I would definitely be questioning that one a little bit. But I mean, I just, for me, it's policing's very, very delicate in a lot of ways with community, like how you do go about it, and different things impress upon people sometimes in different ways. And one of the things I've noticed is that, especially in the U.S. more so, the uniforms are looking more and more like military uniforms. And like you're talking, a lot of the guys that are in the police are ex-military. There's a real military sense in the United States and police forces. But then, you know what I mean, in some of those places, the guns are ridiculous that they have in the States and compared to Canada. So they're up against an arsenal in some situations.
Yeah, and we really do want to be approachable, because I'll tell you, there's nothing worse than having a parent saying, "Oh, there's a police officer. If you don't behave, they're going to put you in jail." It's like you'd go right over to the mom and say, "No, please don't say that, because when your child gets lost, we want them to come to us. We want them
for
to
sure.
feel, that we're approachable, so we can help them get home."
You know what was interesting? I was thinking about when that guy from Incel was in the van, and the officer didn't shoot him. That was a uniquely Canadian police incident, I think. In the States, he would have been shot for sure. Do you not agree with that?
I spoke with the officer, and actually
You spoke to him personally.
I do know him.
Okay.
So I just wanted to let him know that I was thinking about him and asking how he was doing. And
Sure.
it was a very difficult day, and I think it'll come out eventually as what he knew when he knew it, and that impacted his decision to shoot or not shoot. But it was tough, because seeing it in the press myself, now not being an officer, I don't know that I would not have shot him. When he kept kind of maneuvering as if he had a firearm, you really had to know that he didn't to not take that shot.
Was the officer pointing his gun at him at that time? He was fully He fully
Yes.
had been drawn
Yes.
and was ready to shoot and was saying, get down. That's a lot of poise.
And there's a lot of other factors too. I mean, you can see in the videos that I've seen publicly is that, there's people around and it's a busy time of day. So, we're trained, we're well trained to shoot on the target, but God forbid, it goes somewhere else. So
For sure.
there's a lot of factors I think that are going through any officer's head when
I don't want to make this
you're in
worse.
that situation.
I don't want to make the situation worse than it already is. Yeah. And the stress that's a crazy stress situation that officer was in with that guy. Unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and it's in such a difficult situation because you do have the typical Monday morning quarterbacks. You have people saying, I know he's hurt. You've made it tough for us all now, especially the Americans, because you didn't shoot the guy.
Yes.
And then you have other people saying, well, he had a high level of training, that's why he didn't shoot. But if the next officer shoots, are they going to say, well, why couldn't he be like that guy? It's very interesting because we've had officers who have shot, and then we have the one who didn't. And every situation's unique, and you really have to take all the circumstances into
Well, that guy's
consideration.
completely dialed in on that target right there. He's looking at that guy. He's got his gun pulled. He's thinking to himself, I could kill this guy right now. For sure, he's trained to use that weapon. It's not like he doesn't know how to shoot a pistol.
Right.
And he's under it. Should I shoot him? Should I not shoot him? He's reaching behind himself. Okay, you get down now, buddy. Or I mean, the way that thing played out, I think that's a point of pride for the Toronto Police Force. Whether he shot him or not, I think the fact that he didn't showed good training, good timing. The goal is not to be shooting even criminals, even disgusting, horrible criminals. You don't want to shoot them.
I'll tell you, that to me would be an officer's worst day and their family's worst day.
If you shot them.
If you
yeah,
shoot someone.
for sure.
You don't really ever want to be in that situation. I know I never did, and I'm glad that I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you, when we have SIU investigations, they're really, they have to do their job. But it's the least of your worries when you've got all the public opinion and your families, your kids are going to be impacted. There's so many people that'll be impacted by a situation like that. Really, it's an officer's worst day if you have to get involved in a shooting like that.
Yeah, I don't think he's a hero when he shoots him in that position. It's almost like you had to do it. You had no other choice.
Yes.
You're not going home saying, "Yeah, I shot the guy. Yeah, I got him."
Yeah.
No,
Not at all.
It's not like that at all, for sure. Tell me a little bit, just to change gears here, and this is a very popular topic nowadays. Tell me a little bit how you feel about marijuana legalization.
That's a tough one, and I'll tell you because, like alcohol, I think people can enjoy, let's say, marijuana, just like they can enjoy alcohol without taking it to a point where they're getting inebriated or they're putting themselves or other people in danger. And this is my concern is now people who think, well, I'm not drinking and driving, but I'm, smoking up and driving. There are tests to detect, when there's drug use.
So you can test if someone's, is there like a, I don't know what the level for alcohol is, but there's like 0.08 or something is the legal limit.
Yes.
Do they have a legal limit for cannabis use?
There's interdiction testing. We have some officers who have that training. It's a high level of training. I just think, everyone's going to be impacted by the legalization of marijuana. And I think that's where, we're going to run into problems. And I was listening to a news story yesterday where a father said it was a gateway drug for his son to get into more serious drugs. So that's certainly a concern. Is it going to be, first first marijuana and then, acid or heroin, like meth.
Sure.
We already have problems on our streets like that. So those are the huge concerns. I absolutely have no issue with medical marijuana. I think there's some real benefits there. I've seen it myself. People with epilepsy or people with seizures.
For sure, the epilepsy, you see it. I think anyone that's interested in that issue has seen the videos on YouTube, and it's really incredible.
Right.
And then CBD also has anti-inflammatory properties for people. But so, are you in favor of recreational marijuana legalization?
I think there should have been a referendum. How about that?
Okay.
I think really maybe everyone should have been able to voice their opinion because everyone's impacted differently. I just don't know. I haven't seen all the regulations yet, but I don't know if we have what's in place, which is barreling down at us for October, that we're really going to be ready for what might be coming our way.
You know, it's funny. So I've in the lighting. So growing marijuana is a lighting business in many ways, and so when it was legalized in Colorado, I went down there with a friend of mine to look at some grow ops to see what kind of lighting they were using, and he had one of my colleagues had a customer that he was working with, and what's happening there, I think, is a lot of criminals have just been legalized. So a lot of operations where criminals were, involved in the drug trade are now become legal business entities. But the criminal element is not gone from who they are. Another thing is, I think most people don't realize that edible marijuana affects people a lot differently than smoking marijuana does. And so we took a tour of Denver when we were there. We went to some of the, what do they call them? Dispensaries are called. And a lot of it is edible marijuana. And this is a completely different psychoactive effect over smoking marijuana. You can have hallucinations. It's much more powerful. You can eat a lot more of it and cause yourself all kinds of different problems. I don't think our society knows anything about that. Like the general person who thinks, oh, my cousin's smoking weed for 30 years. He's okay. He's a nice guy. He goes to work every day. I have 2 glasses of wine every night. What's the difference? Right? That's kind of the general feeling, I think, of people who are in favor of it, right? Well, nobody ever got into a fight when they were stoned. It's always alcohol that's the problem. Why don't they make alcohol legal and marijuana legal? You hear these kind of things. I don't think they fully understand that the impact of different forms of marijuana and whether or not that should be legal or not, or under the same umbrella. And right now it is going to be under the same umbrella.
Yeah, no, it's a great concern. And that's what I'm talking about is there needs to be a level of education that maybe is not existing. Because like I said, there's a lot of assumptions that, edible marijuana is just as great as regular marijuana that you would smoke.
Sure.
But you don't know, too, like what may be in that. We were seeing, fentanyl it's made a huge, huge impact on the communities lately. And there's just great concern.
But that's the argument for it, is that people will be able to partake in these cleaner products because it's now regulated. I don't know if they know what to. I mean, for me, I don't know. What do you feel? How do you feel about police chiefs being involved in? I think there's a couple different issues I have, but I want to get your take first.
Well, truthfully, it's tough. It's been certainly tough to see the likes of Bill Blair and Julian Fantino and some of my police chiefs who at once, I was hired by Bill Blair once upon a day for the Morality Bureau, and he was one of the hardest hitting street cops against marijuana and drugs. He was a drug street cop. And I get that they're saying now is, they've been educated, they've turned the corner. Unfortunately, rumors that I'm hearing, and again, it's just rumors, is a lot of them are involved in having stocks in these great products. So I can't say the same for Bill Blair, but definitely I know Julian Fantino, that's the case, and others. And like Smitherman and, Kim Derry. So
it's a bit of a cabal, it sounds like.
Are you really in favor of it? Are you in favor of, you can't beat them, so let's join them and make some money off this? I'm just not sure.
You know what? It goes back to it strikes everyone as convenient when I think it was Barack Obama. Let's take Hillary Clinton has a moment of enlightenment, and now all of a sudden believes in gay marriage. Just when the timing of the population switches from agreeing with it and not disagreeing with it. I'm not a truster of converts. Especially when the conversion surrounds financial benefit to the converter.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a lot of concerns. And I'd say the same from some of the police friends that I have. We talk about it and pretty upset about, how suddenly they've turned this corner, and it just really seems like there's monetary gain there. And, let me hear your personal examples of how it's impacted you or your family. I mean, I can at least come up with some that I know it's helped, like a family member who had multiple sclerosis, or I have
Sure.
a family member who has epilepsy, I can say that I've seen the benefits of it.
There's a difference between going to the pharmacy and getting a
Yeah.
prescription, though, and going to Max and buying it. There's a difference between those things. I don't know. See, I'm a big decriminalization proponent of these types of things. I think decriminalization a lot of people don't understand the difference, and there's a huge difference between decriminalization and legalization. Legalization is an endorsement for recreational use of marijuana. And I have 4 children, and I know that right now, my oldest high school is completely full of marijuana. Like, it's more accessible than it has ever been, and we know that children that use that drug before certain ages, it can cause them significant problems. Psychological problems. They have propensity. I'm not a scientist, but just they know that the teen brain is it's not a good thing to have alcohol or marijuana affecting it. I think that my opinion is that it is a gateway drug. I don't see, I think it's a gateway drug for sure for young people.
Right. No, I wouldn't disagree, because, young people it's about trying new things. That's what you do
exactly.
when you're young.
Yes.
You experiment. But to the point of you're seeing some people get irreparably harmed or die, and that just causes me great concern. And I don't know how they're going to deal with it in the workplaces. I mean, we already have trouble with people who just want to go for their smoke break. What's it going to be when they have, a prescription for their medical marijuana break or anything else?
People with prescriptions for medical marijuana are for sure driving around under the effects of marijuana. Absolutely, for sure. There's absolutely no question about that.
Well, any kind of impairment,
whether or not they're supposed to, or they're driving heavy equipment, and,
Impaired is impaired. So whether you're impaired by even lack of sleep, you could be charged with impaired if you're running cars off the road. That's all. I mean, impairment is that situation where you're just not fully cognizant and able to carry on about your daily routine. So driving while impaired, whether it be drugs or alcohol or lack of sleep, or even, like you said, prescription medication, there's limitations. And do we have everything in place for people to be able to safely go about their business?
I would say for sure no. And I want to add something else. I want to see if you agree with this or not. Okay, so I'm a proponent of decriminalization as opposed to as a step.
Right.
Right? As opposed to let's legalize it. Like, let's stop putting people in jail for, I think there's an issue of hypocrisy in our society, especially when you hear about various police chiefs and that getting involved in these enterprises. And hey, if they're legal, they're legal. If what they're doing is not, there's a difference between legal, ethical, and moral, by the way. Those are different things, okay? But to me, there's a bit of hypocrisy. If you've spent a career putting people in jail or arresting them for marijuana offenses, and, a lot of times if you get into that line, if you've been arrested, say, for having, an ounce of marijuana on you, and then you get into that system of being arrested and you end up becoming a criminal, there's a path between, getting arrested, you have a higher chance of being arrested again. And if you kind of meet other people that have been arrested, and I think a lot of lives have been ruined by, maybe overly harsh marijuana laws, particularly more in the United States than in Canada. But now you go from that, and there's this conversion moment, and now you're set to benefit financially from the sale of marijuana. I think there's some hypocrisy there.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's how I feel too, is that, either you believed in it or you didn't, and you can't go around arresting people to the extent that you did. And then now, really, I question for financial gain, or is it really because you just believe, let's live and let live? Is that okay?
Yeah, I don't think he was on the road to Damascus and Jesus knocked him off his horse. Okay, I think we're talking about the dollar bills, y'all. I think for sure it's that. There's no question about it. And then you develop your narrative to suit that. Oh, geez, I read this study and all sort of stuff. Hey, man, either lives were being ruined by marijuana when you were a police officer or they weren't. Which one was it? Tell us. Did you make a mistake?
Yeah.
tell us, be honest about it instead of this, I've now realized on, this sort of thing. I think it's hypocritical. Okay, human relations training section. Let's move on to maybe a darker curtain in your career, the child exploitation, when you were detective sergeant of that division, special victims and that.
Right. So from 2006 to 2011, and actually once before that as a constable, I worked for Project P, which was pornography.
Okay.
So that was a provincial unit. And that was in the early 90s. So it was super interesting because we were just getting into computers back then and the internet. And I remember being given a report that a student in the University of Michigan had sent a horrific letter depicting, the sexual abuse of children, sent an email to somebody in Ontario, Toronto. And I was to go downtown into this room and get the server and the evidence so that we could take him to court. Well, the server was larger than this room. And I just remember I said, I'm here to get evidence. I had no idea really, because I didn't know about computers much back then. And it was just impossible. They just said, well, you can't take this.
So there was a perpetrator in Toronto with a server? Is that what it was?
I think it was more of servers that would host, that you could send it other places, I guess, in the world.
So this person was hosting illegal pornography depicting children on a server?
No, well, what it was is that somebody from the University of Michigan sent through, I guess, a server in Toronto, his letter that was going off to a different location. And it was about he depicted about what he'd like to do to young kids sexually. So it was illegal. But we couldn't get the evidence because somewhere in this massive,
you need an IT expert.
10-ton computer, it was there. And, the guy just looked at me like I had three heads. And I looked at him, I said, so you can't get me what I need? He said, no. But that was the floppy disks. That was back in the day. So eventually, the stuff I dealt with back then was, hardcover books and stuff that came through the mail and magazines and things like that. And then some local pornography that was being made here in Toronto. It escalated so that in 1992 and 1993, we were making some arrests of some men that were running a pedophile ring down in the downtown core. Anyway, I got away from that after this project had completed and always wanted to get back to it. I always felt, to me, it was as important as homicide, but even more so. And I still feel that way today because the victims that you're seeing now live, they're just looking at you, looking at the camera, begging, crying for help.
Sure.
And, sorry, where we put all our resources, the homicide, but some of those victims have passed, and you can't change that.
Passed, you mean passed away?
Passed away. They've been killed. They, by
These
murder.
are Canadian children?
No, sorry. What I'm talking about the difference between our homicide units
right. Yes,
versus our child exploitation units.
So you have people that are alive that are asking for help and being victimized while they're alive.
Yeah, young children. And they're just, you're seeing video of this day in, day out of kids being sexually abused or manipulated, and you just want to get there and help. And there were some really great days. I had a fantastic team that was connected to everyone everywhere in the world. And that was a great thing about the internet was we were working with Australia and we were working with the UK and Germany and all over the world, especially the US. And quickly, as soon as we could pinpoint where somebody lived, we've actually had live action where we were conversing with someone, the police came to the door. We were able to get them behind the scenes while my undercover officer was chatting away. Someone who was talking about, I'm going to go get my daughter out of her bed. We're going to abuse her and you can watch. What would you like to see?
My daughter? Is there a stepdaughter or was it an actual daughter?
This was a daughter. I mean, there were mothers who would also give up their children for the same things just to have someone be interested in them or loved. It's crazy. I mean, the investigations we finally in Toronto, we pinpointed down to the ones that would have the most community impact. And what we mean by that is where we would actually want to be saving real children. There was so many. I mean, this would be back in 2010. Any given day in Toronto, there were 8,000 people uploading and downloading child porn. And in Canada, the statistics, were much, much higher.
Okay, so there was let me just I want to
Sorry,
just
throwing some numbers out at you.
I want to just slice and dice those a little bit. In discussing this, some research I had, there was a pornography star. I can't remember her name. Matt may know it. Matt, do you know who I'm talking about? Who did a bunch of videos but lied to everybody and said she was.
So her name is Tracy Lords. Tracy Lords was 16 years old when she got into the scene. She lied about her age. She lied about her name. She made up a fake ID. When she was 18 or 19 years old, she created a company called Tracy Lords Company and then ratted herself out. Well, she says she didn't, but she ratted herself out to the FBI. And every single one of her videos had to be pulled around the world or else you were in holding of child pornography. But the thing is, she was also the biggest porn star at the time. So the only way that you could go and get one of her videos now was to buy the only legal copy that she owned.
Okay. So how much of, when you say 8,000 people uploading and downloading, how many people have knowledge that that's what they're doing? Like, is it clearly children are we talking about here, or is there is it
I would say
just under 18?
No, I would say majority know exactly what they're doing. So think about Napster back in the day when you would, files would come up, like all those file sharing programs that we used to have. But when you put in,
like we're talking prepubescent children.
Yes. So when you're putting in PTHC, that's what you're searching for. Preteen hardcore.
Okay.
I mean, that's not Britney's boobies. It's a big difference. So we can usually tell when we're dealing with a teenager or a young adult who's searching for, bum photos and titties and all this versus people who are very specific on looking for what, there would be these acronyms. So they'd put that out, PTHC, probably given away, and, you would just get all these different videos. And they would come across, it would be as unique as a thumbprint. So we would know eventually they would all have a certain number. So unless someone changed a pixel in the photo or the video, that when we search for the same one, once we had a video, we would identify it by the same unique identifier, throw it out into the system, and we could tell 8,000 people had that video or uploading or downloading that video. And it's probably even more, I'm sure the tools are probably even better today than they were 5 years ago, 8 years ago.
Sure. But also the tools of the perpetrators would also be better as well in shielding themselves. Yeah, like it's a cat and mouse game.
The dark web is certainly somewhere where it's a lot harder to find. And the groups have their rules for a reason. It's very tough to get into some of those really close-knit groups, but the things they're doing are absolutely horrifying.
For sure. What's wrong with these people? Like, what is it? Are they the victims of child sexual abuse themselves, as often comes out? Or have you met any of these perpetrators? Have you seen them, like been in front of them?
Yep, I've interviewed some myself.
What's that like when you're asking them questions? What's that like?
It's difficult because, you have to be as professional as you can be. And you actually even have to try and...
Like, this is a person who has victimized children sexually, prepubescent children. Like, not teenagers. No. I mean, that's bad too, but I mean, to me, there's a difference between, a 16-year-old and an 8-year-old. To me, there's a huge difference between those two things.
Yeah, and the ones I'll say that we concentrate on were definitely prepubescent.
How many people are related to the victims? Is that common?
Well, you would typically find by the time we got around to arresting someone, they've had relations with multiple children. So usually when the police say, okay, we've arrested this one person, is there anybody else who may have been impacted? We do almost like a 360 investigation. So let's say it's a father and his stepdaughter. We'll check out all his children, all the other stepchildren, anyone he may be babysat,
he coached,
where he's worked, absolutely. And so you'd really try and find out who's been impacted.
Wow.
And so when you look at Toronto Police, who've got one of the top units in the world, probably are making about 50 arrests a year, if that, because they're so complicated.
How often do these guys get convicted?
I'd say most.
Okay. Is it all guys? Is it all men, first of all, or is it 50-50? What's the percentage?
No, it's 99% men. Okay. On occasion, you'll have a female who's been involved, kind of like a Bernardo situation where...
She's more like a like
an
the woman would more like
accomplice.
a what do you call that? They're aiding
Yes.
the situation,
Yeah.
or
I mean, you do-
enabling
Yeah.
this to happen.
You do get the odd woman who puts her own children, makes
That's
them
what I'm talking about,
available.
yeah.
You'll get the odd children
the
who will
mother-
do that.
the mother?
Yeah, because usually they've been abused themselves and they just want love, but mostly it's men. And it's 99% of the time. And so we would typically go after, the coaches, the Santa Clauses, the clowns, the anyone who would have a close relationship with children, who'd be able to, unless you got a case, like the odd one would come through, we'd have someone who was actually making it, and there was a large arrest. I think it was the Ascot videos.
Making the videos, or making the content, or whatever?
Yeah, and it was international. They were having people all around the world send them like raw video. They would repackage it, make it available,
so
send
gross.
it worldwide.
How can you live with yourself? Wow. Let me ask you on that kind of thread. I don't know if you would be able to speak to this, but I remember hearing a statistic that that really blew me away. Like really kind of struck me as being, this is wild. That children are not double or triple, but 100 times more likely to be abused when sexually abused when they're living with a parent, a father who's not their own father. 100 times more likely. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Okay. I'm not aware of that statistic. No.
I read it, and that doesn't mean that 100%. What it means is that instead of 1%, it might be 10% or something like that. Like when you're talking about percentage, doesn't mean that stepfathers are bad. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. But is it a lot of stepfathers in this situation?
We typically found young girls were more abused by familial relations, and
like
young
uncles or cousins.
Yes.
Okay.
And young boys would be more the coach, the scout leader, the teacher.
Yes.
Other people. That would be what I saw more myself in the years that when I worked there.
So you have, it's so scary. It's hard. And how do these guys, like, do they just seem like normal people to you and me, or can you tell they're creeps?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of them that we had arrested would be teachers. And, we used to hear from so many people from the community, from the schools, like, how could you? How dare you? You're wrong. There's no way. And at the end of the day, I mean, the proof was in the videos and the pictures, and that's not true. I mean, that they absolutely were victimizing kids. And they're master manipulators. Like I had one situation, I remember one investigation where this male, I think he was a relative, maybe an uncle, he was sexually abusing one of the relatives, a young girl, I think she was 9 or 10. And he said, if you don't keep participating, I'm going after your 6-year-old sister. So she never said a word to anyone until her early teens, but he was already abusing the sister all the while, and he'd said the same thing to her too. So just some really horrific stories out there.
And that was how was he related to,
he was the uncle.
He was the uncle. And was he blood? I hate to ask these kind of questions, but I'm just trying to parse it in my mind.
Right.
Was he related to them by blood? Like, was that his sister's kids?
Yes. So it tears families apart too. I mean,
sure.
You've got a lot of situations, and so here's my public service announcement is it's difficult to know as a family what to do. I mean, you really want to come forward. You want to tell the police. You want to get this person dealt with. You want to see him go to jail. But boy, does that impact a family. And especially there's some families where culturally this would destroy them. So,
Give me an example. Culturally, what do you mean? Like certain people from places in the world, like India or Pakistan or
yeah, but let's
Africa?
say here that if they found out an uncle had been abusing one of the children, one of the daughters, let's say, I think they rather just push it under the carpet. I'm not saying all families, please don't.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want the Indian community to get mad at me. I'm just saying sometimes some families, and it could happen in any kind of family, would rather sweep it under the carpet than to do anything about it. But children need to be believed, and that's really what's important. Or they need to get help. You need to get them away from that situation, and you need to get them the support they need. Nothing is worse than when a child who isn't believed. And then it usually continues on because the child's already come forward once, and the parents didn't do anything about it, so you just leave them in that situation.
Did you work very closely with the Children's Aid Society?
Yes, we had a lot of great supports. Now in Toronto they have, and in other places across Canada, which is great, is child advocacy centers. So typically you'll have a child who will go to an advocacy center, and in one place you've got a medical team, you've got the police, so you've got investigators, you have Children's Aid, and you have other support staff who can not only just help the child but help the family. So it's one-stop shopping, and it's a much better way to approach situations like these than before when it was just the police.
So you hear these statistics about sexual assault, how rarely people report it, and how, so for example, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but let's say women who are sexually assaulted, only 1 in 3 reported, or 1 in 10, or something like that. You hear these statistics, right? And then for men, it's even less. What are how big is this problem in your point? Is it a lot bigger than what you guys were able to investigate? Is it more pervasive than we think?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's difficult to come forward. I mean, there were a lot of false allegations that came forward. So first of all, you want the police to believe you, and now we're trained that absolutely you'll listen to their whole story and take their seriously, including for sex trade workers, which was a big problem for Toronto in the past. And we have a special unit now that just deals with sex trade workers. So if they're in a bad situation, they will be believed, and they will be their complaint will be acted upon. But to go.
So hang on, so they're working as prostitutes, and then they're going to the police saying I was sexually assaulted.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it could be by the client. It could be the fact that they might have a pimp, someone who's forcing them. It's like human trafficking. I mean, that's kind of the area that has a bit of crossover now, is that, maybe they were a runaway and now they're being forced, and really, maybe their passport's being kept. There's all sorts of situations.
Sure.
So you really want to make sure that if they come forward, they're being believed, which is the case now. And finally, in a lot of, at least in the bigger cities, there's lots of support there. So we have housing, we have, temporary, I think welfare will step in and help them out in certain ways too. And immigration now is more understanding. So let's say if they're foreigners, they're not treated the way they were in the past, which is, we're going to put you on the first plane and get you out of the country. And typically they end up right back here. It doesn't solve anything.
So you have let's say you have a sex trade worker who's from another country outside of Canada, and they're here on they're brought here under false pretenses, perhaps.
Right, it happens.
And then next thing you know, they find themselves in a prostitution ring.
Right.
This is common?
It happens, for sure. They're brought over here, told that they're going to be a nanny, and next thing you know, they're a stripper.
I thought of that. Yeah, for sure.
And instead of, a stripper or a sex trade worker, and their passport's held, they're told that we paid for your ticket over here, which would be typical in some nanny situations.
Sure.
So now you have to work it off. But, they just never seem to be able to pay that debt. And they're just...
Yeah, it's indentured servitude. What do they call that when there's a name, I can't remember, there's a name for it, where they're just, they're debt slaves or something like that, where they can never get out of it. And, let's say, a policeman walks into a strip club and says, are you a slave here? They're not going to tell the police officer or anything. They're scared out of their minds.
Absolutely. And drugs becomes a lot of it. So a big part of it, and then now they're so drugged up that...
Yeah, some pimps got their hooks into them, and their lives they're just a piece of meat to this.
Yeah.
Wow. Oof. That's some heavy stuff. How do you police that? How do you deal with that? That's got to be a major strategy and spying. Like, it must cost the city a fortune to deal with this stuff.
I'll talk about, the current situation. You hate to say it, but we're very reactive right now, Toronto Police, because again, the transformations that they want, which is a reduced police service. And I understand. There's absolutely some things that the police shouldn't be doing. There's some work that other communities or supports are better at it than we are. Let's say, especially in the area of mental health. But a situation like that, it's not that we go looking. It's probably going to be complaint-based. So if there's no complaint coming,
you're not going.
No, unless somebody else brings it to our attention. I just think that's how tight things are stretched right now for Toronto.
So if somebody made a call saying, I think there's, I'm from Romania, or what? I'm not picking on Romania, but I'm from Romania, and I'm in a sex trade ring operation here. I work at this strip club, and help me. What would happen?
Well, I think if that call came in to the right person and it got bumped to the right unit, and assuming someone was there to take the call,
sure,
they would definitely work on it. But that's assuming there's not another 50 cases like that already in the file. Someone would definitely take a report, but after that, I can't assure. And usually, sex trade workers move so frequently because of situations like that. They'll never stay in Toronto. They'll be here stripping for a week, and then they'll be in Calgary, and then they'll be in Vancouver, and then they'll be back out east. So that's part of the strategy of a lot of the human traffickers. They just keep them moving.
They're like inventory to these people.
Yeah, and they're a great source of revenue. Just keep using them over and over.
That's interesting policing conundrum, because who do you... does that makes the users of those services criminals too? Well,
that's the thing. If there wasn't any interest in a young girl for any reason, then there'd be no market for it.
Unfortunately, that you're not going to get rid of that, I don't think. I mean, I'm not talking children, but I'm talking, just in terms of sex. Hang on, we're talking about
red light district.
Decriminalize. I mean, how do you deal with it? See, the other problem too is I find like a lot of times things can be masked. You're picking on this community again, or you're picking on the police are picking on the Asian community, or I'm going to point it out right now. You can't swing a dead cat in this neighborhood without hitting, spa, massage, $30, right? Yeah. You can't. The signs are everywhere, right? Now, I would say that most of those people do not have a 91122 work visa for being in Canada. You know what I mean? Whatever the number is. They're here on some other way of getting into Canada, and they, again, I'm not sure that that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because things have certainly transitioned over time. I mean, when my early days on the police service, I was in the Morality Bureau.
Okay.
And so I spent a lot of time watching massage parlors, and we'd hit them with bylaw officers, and we'd go in and we'd check their, all the credentials and make sure that they were legally authorized to work here in Canada and to perform that job. Because you really want a massage from an RMT, a registered masseuse therapist. But, there's a nice little scam. They get a copy usually of someone's RMT that they will loan out or sell out. And I'd say you can get a massage from that person, but by appointment only.
Sure.
So they'll come in for it. Otherwise, you get who's working. But we used to spend a lot of time doing that. I used to work out on the streets myself. We did the Johns and as well as the young ladies. And now, though, there's really, unless it becomes a huge problem or by complaint, it's not one that we're spending as much time on. I mean, I can tell you there's no morality unit now. Like back in the day, it was gambling, drugs, and prostitution.
How dare you have a morality unit nowadays? It's almost like that, eh? How dare you? That's kind of what it is in some ways.
Well, it's all about what the community is willing to accept or not. And back in the day, it was different. That's what they wanted, I guess, policed. And now, is it harmless? So what if someone wants a massage? Is that hurting anybody? I don't know. I guess tell the person at home if they pick up a disease, maybe.
Well, I think there's issues there's hygiene issues for sure. So I'm a spa owner. I own a spa in Port Stanley.
There you go.
Okay. It is, we have an RMT, but we also offer relaxation massage as well, which is a lower price than non-RMT. But you think about, that's a great way to get around this problem. If you're into sex trafficking or that sort of thing. Wow. There's so many. It's too complicated. There's so many holes. I like that morale. I think we do need a morality division, but it sounds kind of Orwellian in a way.
Well, like I said, it isn't a priority right now for the police. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a community standard that people just have to. Unfortunately, the police now have to do less with less. And so I think it's going to have to be the community or the politicians to decide really what they want us to do. But having us in the last number of years running around like chickens with our head cut off, trying to put fingers in all the little holes that are out there, it's not working. Mm-hmm. We really have to be able to focus our efforts. And like I said, I think the basic thing is when you call the police for help, you want us to show up. And people have to be educated too. I used to get calls that my son's not doing his homework. But that would be someone who didn't understand the role of the police.
Yes.
And that we weren't coming. We weren't going there for that. And
you're under arrest, son. Get that assignment done.
but some people call, it's a full-on domestic situation. And so, where we used to be there within 10 minutes, I'm concerned now that the time is escalated. And when you're the one who's at the receiving end of some abuse, that's pretty tough waiting.
Well, first of all, just to pick up the phone and call the police is a huge step for some people. Mm-hmm. That's a huge step, to pick up the phone and call the police on your husband. That's often a line in people's marriages.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, it's over when I call the police on you or something like that. It's like you hear about these situations where, Shannon called the police on Jay and it's over now. And the police came to the house and whatever, took him away or whatever it was. And that's often a line people like it's a mental place they come to. And when they come to, you want the police to come for sure.
And we can do so much better. I know I can tell you we've improved immensely from back in the day, because the other part to that, so I used to be Toronto's domestic violence coordinator for a couple of years too. I've had a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Loved them all. It was a great career. But it used to be that, typically males were the ones charged and not the females. And there was a lot of community activism about this. They didn't want, the Women's Abuse Council of Toronto, WACT, not a great acronym, but that's who they were back in the day. They fought us bitterly if we ever decided to charge a female, because they said, women are, if they reacted, it's only because they've been already beaten so much that they had no other choice.
That's an entrenched view, actually, in a lot of circles.
Yeah. And you know what? It's in some cases it's true, but not in all cases.
Here's the issue. So, and a lot of people don't want to deal with these kinds of issues, but women hit their husbands way more than men hit their wives.
That's not true.
It is true. It is true. It's statistically true. Yeah. It's statistically true. It's just that, men are usually stronger than women.
Well, I don't know who does most of the hitting. I just know who does most of the calling. So.
I think it was Jordan Peterson. I know he's kind of he's an interesting fellow, but I was listening to one of his podcasts and he tends to tell the truth about statistics. And he was saying that, I can't remember what the percentage was, but women hit their husbands way more than men hit their wives. The problem is, like, I'm not even that big. And, you're a police officer, you're probably trained to hit, so don't hit me. But generally, men are married to women that are 20% smaller than them, or men. The idea of a woman marrying a smaller man is not so common. Mm-hmm. So when men hit their wives, it's a completely different situation, though. It's a more criminal situation for sure.
Well, and again, talk about stigmatization. Are you going to come into work, any male, and say, "Oh, my wife's beating me"? I just think maybe now it's okay. The doors are open, but back in the day, I don't think guys would ever do that.
Never.
There's no way.
There's all sorts of different issues like that you come across where reporting is out of the question because of the person's status, or they just don't want to tell anybody that they're a victim of X, Y, or Z. Like, my wife hit me with a frying pan last night or whatever. It's different when you use a tool, but hitting is definitely an issue. How did the police sort out a situation? Like, it's so delicate. You go to someone's house and there's violence, and the next day they could say the police are lying. Like, how often does that happen?
Yeah, that happens pretty regularly. I mean, because again, like I said, it takes a lot of different aspects of the whole situation to improve. So from the court end, a lot of times it's changed now. They're trying to get them through court much quicker, but it would be 30, 60, 90 days before it would ever get heard. And usually you've got one spouse who's at home with kids with no money, trying to do all the jobs herself, and the husband's usually taken out and asked to stay somewhere else. But that puts them both in a really terrible situation.
For sure, especially if they're already, living like low-income lifestyle.
Right. Or if they've been kept, let's say, from having any friends or support, it's even worse now. So, I mean...
Or they're a part of an immigrant community that's more insular.
Right. So there's just there has been a lot of great improvements. We just still have a ways to go.
It's like you're asking. It's almost like, how do you make those determinations for a police officer? You know, it's you. Oh, you gave me this statement. You're retracting your statement now, or you're no longer. You know, say. And a lot of these issues are substance abuse related too, are they not? Like there's alcohol abuse in the family.
Some, yeah. But again, you know, it's funny. We almost come full circle now.
Should we legalize marijuana?
Who's better to come back to the call? No, the male or female? And it's just, you know, you'd be surprised. Sometimes female victims would much rather talk to the male. They just want a male to understand their point of view, because normally a male doesn't always listen to them. Sometimes it'll be a female. So the bonding situation, it can be either or, and that's for every type of call. Like I've had some where you just kind of naturally both go, especially if it's a male-female team, and you can just see the person who you're speaking with, the complainant, just typically starts focusing in on one person. And if you're a good team, you'll know naturally the other person should just kind of back off and just take notes or do whatever their job is and let that rapport flow. So, you know, sometimes it's been me and sometimes it's been my male partner, but sometimes it's the other way around too.
There's so much poise and demeanor and emotional stability involved in being in this type of police work, where you're there and you notice the nuances of a situation where something's, this person wants to speak to my partner. Let me quiet down a little bit and kind of move back and let them engage. How do you train for that?
You know, it's funny because people would say, do you believe in permanent partnerships, or do you think, you know, the members should change around all the time? And I kind of believe in both. If you have a great partnership, then there's real benefits to it. You just know, you know, what your partner's thinking because you've worked with them for so long and you can read a situation really well. It's a great relationship. And I also, though, believe in, you know, it's nice to have somebody new to work with because you're always learning. Oh, that's how you dealt with that kind of situation. That's kind of cool. I haven't done that before. So especially for young people, I rather they work with as many different partners as possible, newer officers. Shouldn't say just young because they come in at all ages. But I think they have the most to gain that way than if they just work with one person.
A couple more questions.
Sure, it's been great.
Okay, how about communities being policed by their people of their own community? So white officers not policing black neighborhoods, or is it better? Like you hear about this, we need more black police officers, we need more female police officers. Is it actually better when is it easier for you know, a black police officer to police people in a largely black community? Is it easier for them?
I don't know if I'd necessarily say that so. I think they'd be the better people to ask. But I know, let's say in 23 Division, like that would be north of Etobicoke, we typically had a lot of officers who were South Asian. Okay. Because, you know, so being Indian. Close to Brampton and also in North Etobicoke, and quite a few black officers. And so they're going into these neighborhoods. Like Rexdale or whatever. Yeah. And sometimes, you know what, there's no doubt that they did understand, but it all depends on their upbringing. I mean, if you came from those areas, then I think you have the greater understanding whether you're black, white, Indian, whatever, versus just being black. Because I've seen some black officers or Indian officers ridiculed and really rode hard by their own, you know, communities, just because it's almost like they're a turncoat. What are you doing here investigating this? Why are you here? Why are you doing this job? Some people don't hold the police in high regard. Other people do. It's very unique. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that they would be thought of as traitors in a way by their community. It's interesting that I never even considered that side of it. You'd think that, I guess maybe there's an issue in communities supporting themselves being policed.
Yeah. I mean, we've tried. I know I was, what year was it? I think it was 2011, 2012. There had been a particularly violent year for North Etobicoke the year prior. So there was the Neighborhood Tavis Initiative, which is when they took extra officers from all around Toronto, put them in the cars in those areas, and took officers from that area, and they did community policing for the whole summer. So we went from May right through till September, and we were concentrating on 2 neighborhoods. And we were there day in, day out on bikes and cars, walking, whatever we could do. And the level of violence actually did drop when we had that high level of concentration. And we met some great neighbors and developed some great relationships with them. You really had hoped that the kids would see that, oh, police aren't so bad. And they were a real mix of officers, from every community, every nationality, as many as we could. But as soon as we pulled out of there, as soon as we weren't in there, that level of concentration, right now it's gone right back to what it was. So, it's unfortunate. I don't know why we can't keep those relationships up. They're hard to do. And sometimes it's hard to do just because the police, we move around a lot. We don't stay in the same areas doing the same job all the time. Like even myself as an example, I've probably held 12, 13 different positions over my 31-year career.
Wow. That's so the increased police presence reduces violence.
That's
did pretty help. Simple.
It did help. I wouldn't say they necessarily were coming forward with more information, but just us being there made a difference.
Was there much violence against the police officers while they were there?
No. Let's see. We had a police car when we were at one radio call. All the windows were smashed out. So that wasn't a good day.
But
no,
nobody got hurt.
Nobody got hurt. But we took steps. For example, if you look even still now at 23 Division, our police doors where prisoners will come in and out, we've had a local graffiti artist come in, and there's graffiti on our police doors. They're police cars, but that's what's on our doors. Just anything we could do to develop that rapport. So
reduce the hostility level between the community and the police. Interesting. Well, so you've become a mediator. How does your police work help the mediation? What do you mediate, first of all?
Right now I'm volunteering mediating in the city of Mississauga, and that soon we're expanding to Brampton. So this is something I've been doing for the last 4 years.
Okay.
And it's basically bylaw type offenses. So
your fence is on my property?
Dog barking, fence line disputes, noise complaints, that sort of thing. So instead of going civilly or suing someone or taking someone to small claims court, it's all about relationships. So what we try and do is we'll meet with each party individually. Typically one will complain and want to try mediation. We will contact the second party saying, look, your neighbor's got some concerns. Will you meet with us individually? So it'll be myself, and we usually always co-mediate. So it's another community mediator. And we'll go in there and we'll listen to them for 3 hours. And, they just get everything.
3 hours.
Well, up to 3 hours. Usually it's about 1.5 the first meeting. And they get everything off their chest. And then if we think everything's going to be fine, there's no violence, it's going to be productive, we'll bring them together. And then we set aside the 3 hours. And I've had people come in yelling and screaming and leaving crying and hugging.
Wow.
You can get them to that level of nothing else than just, again, it's an alternate dispute resolution. It's just a different way of going at it. So we won't take cases on typically if they're already before the courts, but we're starting to work more closely, and this is how I'm getting a little bit more involved with the police, because they're getting chronic complaints that they don't have the time to spend on.
Sure.
So it's the noisy party. It'll be the neighbors smoking drugs. It'll be whatever it is.
Leaving their garbage on the side of the house. Yeah.
If we can get in there. So we typically get our calls from bylaw officers, from police, from neighbors themselves, and we get in there.
Who pays?
This is funded by the city of Mississauga, and I know they also actively go after grants. So Toronto has the same thing. They have St. Stephen's House, which does free mediation all through the city. And I know we're just in talks right now with Toronto Police to do some training. So they're new neighborhood officers. They want them to have some mediation skills. For me, the reason I got started, believe it or not, was I had this woman call. I was a staff sergeant at 23 Division, yelling and screaming and crying, where you can hold the phone away from your ear for a good, 1.5 feet. And finally I got her calmed down, and I said, look, I'm going to send you the best officers I have, and they're going to listen to you, and then they're going to help you. And so I handpicked a couple officers, and I said, I want you to hear her out. And she was in a terrible spot because her husband's health wasn't well. She had a daughter who also had some issues, and she was just pulling her hair out. But it was a neighbor dispute, like a dog coming on her property and loud noise and that sort of thing. So they went, and then she was referred to St. Stephen's, and she did a mediation with her neighbor who had no idea what was going on for her, how bad it had really gotten, how sick her husband was. And everything since then just got better. She started sending us every Christmas this big box of treats, which that was very thoughtful of her. You don't have to send treats. But when I saw that it worked that way, and I know as a staff sergeant, that was a large part of my job, was handling complaints at the front desk. I wanted more tools. So I, at the time, Toronto Police would pay 50% if you'd go out and get related training. So I found a course at York University, which is alternate dispute resolution, got myself trained, and then just looking for an opportunity to apply some of the skills. So I have opened up my own business, but I'm just getting going because I wanted a bit of time after my retirement to declutter and figure some things out. But yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do for companies and businesses. You know, when you have like 2 employees who are fighting, and I've seen it at work, you know, 2 employees just aren't getting along. Do you need it investigated? Do you need to go the human rights way? You know, even if you take, let's say, a situation like Gomeshi, you know, there's criminal allegations there. Well, that can scale all the way down to maybe there's civil allegations. You know, maybe the Employees Standards Act. Maybe it's just really a policy situation. So I think, you know, I can get in and, because I have strong investigative skills, help resolve some of these problems before, you know, your brand is wrecked or it's costing you money, or before, you know, usually a situation like this, everybody knows about it. It's not as secluded as most people think. Like, oh, nobody knows we're fighting. It's like everybody knows you're fighting. So so that's kind of the business I'm looking at getting into.
And so do you have a structure to how you go about this? Like, do you listen to both sides? Do you ever say, buddy, you're wrong, man. You need to change. You're 100% wrong. You're right. Does that ever happen?
Funny you say that. I think that's the biggest hurdle I've had to overcome, because as a police officer, you're very directive. You tell people this is going to work. This is what you're going to do. But as a mediator, you become a listener. So I've really had to learn to listen. And you kind of get past, you know, some of what they're saying to the feelings and to really emotionally how it's impacting them. And that's where you can get the changes. You can transform them there than to deal with, you know, the peripheral stuff like money and issues like that. That's not really usually the crux of the matter. It's more that they don't get to read their book in the afternoon because the shade of Buddy's tree is over them and there's too many birds or
whatever. Yeah.
So
you got to get to the actual real. You know, it comes down to emotion so much.
Yeah.
You know, it's you have the rise to of divorce mediation as opposed to there's like levels, and in the middle between amicable and contested or whatever the word is, there's this divorce mediation, and people can go to it and they sit down with someone who is willing to listen to both sides, and they're able to not, you know, spend 1/3 of their net worth on lawyers to get divorced. Right. You know, because a lot of times people need to be divorced. Like, it happens, you know, sometimes it's over. But then people can't get over, you know, what the value of the house is or whatever the issues are, you know, they can't get by it. But if they go to the courts, they're going to lose a ton of money. They're going to pay a ton of money in legal fees.
And I think you're seeing now these days, even in civil court, you are most likely going to see a mediator before you'll ever see a judge. Same with condominium corporations. They're trying something new. You know, when they have disputes within, I think they're getting ready to move to an online service where we're going to start using Skype or FaceTime and try and resolve it that way without actually making people come out of their units, which sometimes I think face-to-face works better. But the City of Toronto, I know the Ombudsman's office there, they have their own resolution section. So you're certainly seeing mediators more and more.
It's way cheaper.
Oh, yeah. No,
like
absolutely.
It's way cheaper than hostile or courts.
And at the end of the day, if you can resolve 2 people who are battling, and they can, because usually what you do, you try and steer them towards their own ideas of a joint, you know, acceptance, like, you know, that they both agree on these terms, it'll be much more long-lasting than if I sit down the terms, because they may not like them.
Oh, sure. Nobody wants to be told what to do. They want to make a deal and have, you know, they want to be the ones shaking on it or whatever. Yeah. It's funny because I actually have been to small claims court many times. Okay. And you're laughing at me.
Getting to know Michael much better.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I've been through full-blown trials. Now, the reason why is because I'm in the lighting business, blah, blah, blah. I started loaning my customers money to upgrade their lighting systems. So let's say you have you run a garage where you fix cars, and you have 10 inefficient lights in there. And if you take them out, you can save $5,000 a year. Okay, and it costs you $10,000 to do it, and the government's going to give you $5,000 to do it, like a rebate. Okay, so it's a 1-year payback. But the guy doing that, a lot of people that are in that situation, everything they make goes in their pocket to pay for their family. They don't have $5,000 or $10,000 to spend. So I started loaning the money. Turns out, guess what? We loaned out a ton of money, and 98% of people paid. Like, you wouldn't believe how good. I was shocked. I thought it was going to be way higher. Okay, like the vast majority of people, they paid the whole thing, and when they got the rebate, they gave it to us, and most people were very honorable. But, and you think your stereotypes, you'd think, oh, this group of people is going to, no, it was across the board. Everyone was very honorable with us, except for the 2% or 3%. And that constituted, like, I don't know, 120 businesses, and it ended up being. And so we had to start progressing down the course of action. And then once we started serving them with papers from the small claim court, then they would pay, right? And then there was about 20 people left, or 30 people left that had to go to court. They had to be brought into court. Some of them had to be ordered to come to court by the judge, right? But you sit in the settlement conference with the judge. You always have to go to these settlement conferences. And they really press you to not go to trial. Like the judge will tell you, like, I mean, if I go to trial, Your Honor, I'll win my $8,000 for sure. He's like, yes, you probably will. According to these documents, yes, you probably will win. But why don't you just accept the deal anyway and save yourself the time? And they press you to settle. I think a mediator might have been better in that situation rather than someone pressing you.
Well, again, even with the mediators, I know, because I do use them in civil court, it's only like a half hour each case. So you're kind of pushing people along, even though a full traditional mediation, you have all the time in the world. So you'd sit back and let everyone come to the terms themselves. But it is negotiation. It's back and forth. And there's a thing called BATNA, which is your best alternative, because that's what I say to someone in a private conference is, if you're 100% sure, then okay, we can go ahead. But what is your alternative? Like, what if they don't agree? Or what if they don't have the money? Or what if they claim bankruptcy? Are you further ahead? So there's all these things to consider that people might back off that hard position and be willing a little bit more to negotiate.
Yeah, I settled most of them, actually. But I ended up going full-blown trials. And it turns out, you know what it is? Generally, it comes down to when those situations, you're in that situation, it's especially so clear-cut like mine, it's because the other person doesn't have the money to pay you. Yeah. That's what it is. Like, if they just came forward and said that, it would probably stop wasting everybody's time. But that's what a lot of times it is. Listen, Kimberly, I really enjoyed this.
Me too.
Yeah, it was fun.
Pleasure talking with you.
No, my pleasure for sure. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Now, I told you once, I told you twice, don't review us on Amazon. Review us on iTunes, and then you might get a $50 gift card for Amazon. That's how it works. Why does it work that way? Because I don't like contests. I don't like to do rules or anything like that. Maybe Matt will just pick the review he likes the best, and he'll send you a $50 gift card for Amazon. That's Canadian dollars, not American. So, I know there's going to be listeners in the States too. Hey, Kim Scanlan, you're awesome. What a great career you had. It was super interesting. All the different angles and all the different sides of being a police officer, a woman police officer, working in some of those murkier areas of policing. Man, scary stuff. So thank you for coming on the show. And to the rest of you, hey, that's episode 13 of the Get a Grip on Life podcast.